Then let's get started. Here we go. Says the Mishnah. We're on 119b2. 119b2 at the Mishnah. At the very enigmatic Mishnah, which says, Ein maftirin achar Pesach apikayin. We do not finish the Seder, the meal of the Seder, after eating the Pesach with the apikayin. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, my apikayin. What do we mean by the word apikayin? Amar Rab says, Shelo yakru mechabura lechabura. It means that after eating the carbon Pesach, and I'm stressing the word Pesach as opposed to matzah, after eating the carbon Pesach, you should not move from one group, from your group, to another group. Look at the Rashbam, in the first Rashbam in the Gemara. Amar Rav shelo yakiru mechabura lechabura. After you eat the Pesach, b'chabura in your group, lo yelchu b'chabura acheres le'echol. Do not go to another chabura to eat more. Lo pas v'lo shum davar. Nothing. Gezerah dilma osi lemeichel es ha-Pesach b'shnei mekaymis. Because you might come to carry your meat and eat the Pesach in two places, your original place and the new place. And we learned that Pesach nechol b'shtei chaburis ve'ein oichlin oichl b'ha-Pesach b'shnei mekaymis. You cannot eat your Pesach in two places. V'hach milsa de Rab. This that Rab says you can't do this. Ukminin also b'shas achilo of the Pesach. Aval acher achilo. But after you eat the carbon Pesach, yochol la'aker loyma halal b'chabura acheres v'loy pokid. Okay, so this is only purely about the eating of the Pesach. According to Rab, you have to stick at your place, but afterwards you're allowed to float around to finish up halal with another group. On this, back to the Gemara, says Shmuel. The Shmuel Rama, no. Kegoyin or dilai li begozayi la'aba. It means that after eating the carbon Pesach, you should not eat dessert like mushrooms for me and young pigeons for Rabba, who's like Rab, whose real name was Abba. If you look in once again to the Rashbam, the next Rashbam, but skip to the second line. Va'asa Shmuel lemema. Shmuel is coming to tell us. Of course, you're not allowed to go from one chabura to another chabura. But even in your own chabura, also le'echol klum achar Pesach, you're not allowed to eat anything after you ate the carbon Pesach. Shelo yovad mimenu tam haPesach, and because you shouldn't lose the taste of the Pesach inside your mouth. Back to the Gemara. The Rav Chanina Bashil Rav Yochanan Amar going to Morim Kiloyis ve'Goyzim, and they're agreeing with Shmuel, but it means they just say what they prefer. It means that after Pesach, don't eat desserts like dates, grains, or toasted grains or walnuts. 119b3. Tanya Kavosi to Rav Yochanan. Ein maftirin achar Pesach. We do not conclude the meal of the Seder after eating the Pesach with Kigoyin, Tamarim, Kiloyis, ve'Goyzim. Okay, so now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, Ein maftirin achar matzah afikoymen. Change. We may not conclude the Seder after eating matzah with dessert. So today, this is talking about Bisman Hazeh, where you have no carbon Pesach. So what do? Our afikoymen is a piece of matzah. Okay, so now becomes a major question. According to this, what is our mitzvah of matzah? Is it the first kazayis that you eat when you say Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz and ha'achilas matzah, or really you're mekayim the mitzvah of matzah when you eat the afikoymen, because that was the time in the Beis Hamikdash that they ate the matzah as well, because you ate matzah is al meroinim yoichlu. Matzah is with water you ate with the Korban Pesach. So you were yoytzi your chiyuv of eating matzah at the same time that you ate the Korban Pesach in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So today we have matzah. So there's a major machlokes of whether the last matzah that we eat by Afikomen is the actual mitzvah, and therefore, of course, we want the taste on our mouths of the mitzvah, and that's the last thing you do. Or no, even the first one, the first kazayas that we eat is really the mitzvah, but nonetheless, we want to end up with the matzah zeicha to the Korban Pesach. Anyway, says the Gemara, Tanan, ein maftirin achar ha-pesach Afikomen. Mashma achar ha-pesach hu deloy. Only when you actually have the Pesach offering, the Korban Pesach, that you're not allowed to eat dessert after the Suda. Matzah patirin. But after matzah you could, which means that bisman hazeh you're allowed to, which is a contradiction to what Shmuel holds. So says the Gemara, Yomi boy kama. The Gemara is actually saying a Yomi boy. Yomi boy akamatzah. It's unnecessary to teach us that you're not allowed to have any desserts after eating the matzah because the matzah does not have a strong taste. Since the matzah doesn't have a strong taste, we want you to remain with the taste. You definitely can't eat. But after the Pesach, the meat of the Pesach, whose taste is strong, so the desserts will not take away the taste of the Korban Pesach in your mouth. Lest they go, I have no problem with you eating desserts. Kamash Malon, that no, even the Korban Pesach, but what do you call it? We don't want you eating Eimaftirin Achara Pesach Afikomen. Daddy, we're on the bottom of 119b3.
119b3?
All the way on the bottom. We're about to finish it. We're about to get to today's daf. Name a Messiah. Do we want to say that the following brisa holds like Shmuel? Because the brisa says like this: Hasufkonian, which we know are sponge cakes, and in this case sponge matzahs, Vadudushoyin honey matzahs, Ve'eba iskri kiritin, and wafer matzahs. All of these are matzah ashira, made out of fruit juices, etc. Adam imale karisa mehen. A person is allowed to fill his belly with it on the night of Pesach. Ubelvad sheyoichel kazayis matzah be'achroina. As long as he eats a regular lechem oini matzah, at the end by the Afikomen. Says the Gemara. Now remember, there was a big machlokes. According to many, yes, Daddy. We're Mekayim the mitzvah. What?
Where are you holding?
The last words of Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis. The last words of Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis.
Before the Mishnah?
No, the last word of Kuf Yud. The last line. The last line. Okay? So, we're saying over here, Bavad Shiyoichel Kazayis Matzah Be'achroina at the end. So once again, Groisa Machlokes. Do we say that we're Mekayim a mitzvah of eating matzah only with the Afikomen? Because that is when we ate it in the Beis Hamikdash. The Korban Pesach was eaten. Matzahs al meroimer and yochlu. We ate the Korban Pesach with matzah and moro. So we Mekayim the mitzvah of Pesach and matzah together at the end of the Suda. So that's what it mashma over here. Says the Gemara, be'achroina in mashma, that if one eats matzah at the end, that is the correct thing. We're now on today's daf. Kuf chof amid aleph. B'rishayna loi. But if he eats a kezayis or matzah at the beginning of the meal, no good. Look at the Rashbam, the first Rashbam. B'rishayna loi. Why? The ein adam rishayi le'echol klum acher matzah chayva. That means once somebody is mekayim his mitzvah of eating matzah, he can't eat anymore. So if he eats matzah at the beginning of the meal, farfudged, he can't have his whole meal. His wife is going to shoot him. She prepares a whole meal, and he's messed up. Elamai, so you see that it's not like Shmuel. That Shmuel said what he quote. No, so you see, it is like Shmuel, because that's what Shmuel seems to be saying. Shmuel seems to be saying that afterwards, that's it. Even in your own chabura. Remember, Rav said, you can't go from chabura to chabura, but once you eat the korban Pesach in your chabura, you're allowed to continue eating to your heart's content. If you remember the Rashbam back on Kuf Yutes Amid Beis, back on 119b3, the first wide line in the Rashbam back on Kuf Yutes Amid Beis. The first wide line, we would said, V'hach milsa derav ukimya hosam b'shas achilo. But after eating the korban Pesach, right? You're allowed to go ahead and move your legs and say Hallel and move over to another chabura, which is mashma according to Rab. You're even allowed to eat afterwards, as long as you first have to finish your korban Pesach. Shmuel is the one that seems to say that no. Once you eat your matzah, once you eat your korban Pesach, that's it. Everything switches to a halt. This Barai says mashma that. Says the Gemara, no. But back to Kuf Chafam and I was back to 128.1. Anybody kama. Anybody berishona. Nothing to say that if one eats, that one is allowed to eat invalid matzah, meaning matzah ashira, matzah like the sponge cake, the sponge matzah. That you're allowed to eat at the beginning of the Suda, the Ochel L'Tayabayim, because then you'll eat the regular matzah with an appetite. But to eat a valid matzah in the end, after having consumed matzah ashira throughout the entire meal, is problematic. Because you might come to the time of the Afikomen having eaten a full meal plus matzah ashira, rich man's matzah, and now you're stuffed to the gills, and now you got to shtup down a kezayis of the Afikomen. That's a problem because we said in achila gasa loy shemei achila, an excessive consumption is not called eating. A maloi, I might have said this is not permitted. Kamash malon, that no, you are allowed to eat matzah ashira first, and you could shtup your matzah at the end. And the answer is because you're always leaving over a little spot for that matzah. Now we're going to go to the exact same Gemara, but from a different angle. It's going to be the exact same Gemara. Mazutra Mosni Hachi. Rav Zutra taught Shmuel like this. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Patirin achar matzah afikomen. We are allowed to conclude the suda of the Pesach Seder after eating matzah with dessert. You are allowed to. Name of Messiah. Maybe we could say our Mishnah supports Shmuel, because the Mishnah says, "Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen." We are not allowed to conclude the Seder after eating the korban Pesach. Shmuel saying, remember, look, Patirin achar hamatzah afikomen. Achar Pesach deloy. Then it's only when we had the korban Pesach, i.e. at the time, Bisman Shemesa Mikdash Hayakaya. But after matzah, matzah, that's not so bad. That's only zeicher. That's only a zeicher to what we did in the Beis Hamikdash, and we are mekayim our mitzvah of matzah even at the beginning of the meal. Okay, so when we make our moitzi lechem in our oretz and our achilas matzah, and we eat a kezayis, we're yoitzi with that matzah. What about the rest of the meal? Says Shmuel, it's okay, you can eat. Once you make the mitzvah matzah, you're allowed to keep going. It's only on Pesach the actual carbon pesach that you're not allowed to eat further. So the Gemara, no, it's not a raya. Let me buy a kama. Let me buy a matzah. Tell me, it's unnecessary to teach that you're not allowed to eat dessert after eating the matzah because the taste of the matzah is not strong, and so it doesn't remain in your mouth. And we want the taste to be the last thing in your mouth. After Pesach, but after the carbon Pesach, which is a much stronger taste, it's meat. So even if I eat desserts, the taste of the carbon Pesach will remain in my mouth. And Maloi, I don't have a problem with you eating desserts afterwards. Kamash Malon, that the Mishnah is coming to tell us, even Achar HaPesach, Emaptirin Afilu Achar HaPesach, Api Koinim. Says the Gemara Meisvei, I don't like this Baraisa because I've got the Mishnah, the Baraisa, I'm a Meisvei, I got a Baraisa. Hamuv Sokin, right, the suft ganiyot, but in this case it's the suft matzahs, the sponge matzahs, the advushin, the honey matzahs, the es kiritin and the wafer matzahs, odom and malakrisim mehen. A person is allowed to fill his belly, with them on the night of Pesach. Provided that he eats a kezayis of lechem oini at the end. Mashma be'achroina, in only at the end of the meal are you allowed to eat the matzah, because if I eat the matzah at the beginning of the meal, a matirin achar matzah apikoimen, then it would mashma over here. In, because the time when you eat, after you eat the matzah, you can't eat further. So I can't eat, I don't want the matzah at the beginning of the meal because then you won't have the rest of your meal. Akroina in, only the last perishainaloi. So it's mashma over here, from over here, that it's afilu emaftirin achar hamatzah afi koimen, that you, after you eat the matzah, you're not allowed to go further in the meal. Says the Gemara, no, it's unnecessary to teach me that I'm allowed to eat matzah shiro, the sponge matzahs, from the beginning of the meal to achal because you're going to eat the valid matzah with an appetite. But to eat the valid matzah in the end of the meal, after having eaten an hour's worth of invalid matzah, having eaten an hour's worth of matzah shira, so you stuck yourself to the gills with a whole meal plus a lot of rich matzah, the osilamechum achilas gasa, which means that you're going to come to eat that last kezayis matzah of lechem honey when you're completely stuffed up, excessive consumption. And the problem with an achilas gasa lo yishmei achilo, excessive consumption is not called eating. I might think that you're not mekayim the mitzvah of achilas matzah, ein maloi, kamash malon. Therefore, the Brisa comes to inform us that in fact you are allowed to eat the matzah shira first, and you could eat your matzah at the end. So I have no raya one way or another whether we're mekayim the mitzvah of achilas matzah today with that last matzah, or we're actually mekayim it with the first matzah, etc. And now the Gemara is actually going to get into this. Amar Rava, matzah bisman hazeh diaraisa. Today, when there is no carbon pesach, matzah is a diaraisa. Umara derabanan, 128.2. 128.2. Umara derabanan. And mara is a derabanan. So, here's the question. Okay? Now, my shana b'mara, why is mara different? Tiksiv al matzah u'merayim. When is mara mentioned? In conjunction with the carbon pesach, sli eish, roasted over a fire, al matzah u'merayim yechlu. On matzah and mara, you should eat it. Bisman the ikar pesach, yesh mara. Bisman the leka pesach, leka mora. There is no mora. If that's the case, matzah nami hoksib, al matzah sumerayim yochlu. I should make the same deal. Where there's a carbon pesach, I have a mitzvah of matzah. Where there's no carbon pesach, I have no mitzvah of matzah. It should only be midrabanan. And for the Gemara, Matzah mahade hadabekra. That's why the Torah came and brought another pasuk with regard to matzah, which is what? The erev toichlu matzahs. In the evening you shall eat matzahs, establishing that matzah is a standalone mitzvah. Besides the fact that you have to eat matzah together with the Korban Pesach, because it says Sliesh al matzos umeroimerim yoichlu. Nonetheless, there's a separate mitzvah of matzah on the night of Pesach, on the night of the 15th. This year, Matzah Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of the erev toichlu matzahs. The Rab Acher Bayakid Omar Echad Zeh Echad Zeh D'Rabbanan. Nope. Morar and even matzah today is only midrabanan, rabbinical in nature, because we do not have the Korban Pesach. Right? The Gemara alok said be'erev toichlu matzahs, but it's written be'erev toichlu matzahs. What does Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov do with be'erev toichlu matzahs? There's a mitzvah by itself to eat matzahs today. Besides the other question, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Says Rabbi Yaakov, I need the pasuk of Erev Toichlu Matzahs for the one in the time of the Beis Hamikdash who is either tamei or unable to bring the Pesach sacrifice, and therefore that means he was tamei or on a distant road. So therefore he was now going to be mechuyev in Pesach Sheni. He was going to be mechuyev in Pesach Sheni. The Sal Gedat Chamino. I might have thought, Chib on the Pesach Lo Yochli, since on the night of the 15th of Nisan, he's not going to partake in the Pesach offering. Matzah umora. Mora should be in parentheses. It's really matzah nami lo nechol. Mar matzah he wouldn't eat either. Kamash Malon comes the Torah. He says, Eid achanami. You who are tamei or on a distant road are not going to have the Korban Pesach today. You're going to have to bring the Korban Pesach in a month from now in Pesach Sheni. I might think therefore it says Sliesh matzos umeroimerim yoichlu, that I only eat matzahs and when I have the Korban Pesach. So my chiyuv will be to eat the matzah and in a month from now, but not the night of Pesach. Kamash Malon, the erev toichlu matzos. Just because you can't bring the Korban Pesach because you're tamei or you're on a distant road, you still eat matzah where you are. The Rava Malachim, what Rava said, Rava says that erev toichlu matzos is coming to teach us that it's a dioraisa, that even today it's a dioraisa. Right? I don't need a pasuk to teach me that you needed to eat matzah on the night of the 15th of Nisan. It's no different than one who's uncircumcised because unfortunately his brothers died, so he's an oral b'shoigeg, right? And a stranger, meaning this refers to a Jew who became a mumar, right? Who does he stops believing, right? He's a Jew. He's still a Jew. Nonetheless, even though they're not allowed to eat the Pesach offering, the fact is they're still mechuyev in the midst to eat matzah. Victanya kol orel lo yochel boy. The Torah says all uncircumcised Jews shall not eat of it, the Korban Pesach. That's a miyut, it's a limitation. It you shall not eat. But of course you can eat, you're supposed to eat from the matzah and the maror. So I don't need the pasuk to come teach me that, that somebody who's a tamei or on a distant road, who really is mechuyev in the Korban Pesach, just cannot eat the Korban Pesach, is still mechuyev to eat the matzah, because they're no different than an oral or a stranger, meaning somebody who's a mumar a Jew that doesn't believe is still mechuyev to eat his matzah. He just can't eat the korban Pesach. So I don't need the pasuk of Erev Tefel matzahs to teach me this. Salamai, it teaches me that it's a diaraisa. So it's such a good answer. The Idach, what is Rav Acha Bar Yaakov? How does he respond to this argument? Who said that even today matzah is only a derabbanan? Says Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Ksiv Bahai. With regard to the eating of matzah, it's written, and we're on 128.3. It already says like this. It's written with regard to the orel and the stranger, the pasuk we just said, which is kol orel lo yochaboy, kol benecha lo yochaboy. An uncircumcised person shall not eat from it, and nor shall a heretic, essentially. Okay, let me just see if I can find it here. Okay, weiter. Now, V'ksiv Bahai, and it says also by those, the Tomei, and the ones who are on a derech rechaika v'tziricha, and you need it. Because here's the situation. There's a huge difference between the orel and the guys who are Tomei and on a distant road. Okay? So, it's okay. The reality is the Tomei person and the one who's on a distant road will ultimately come to eat the korban Pesach. You hear? When the Tomei becomes Tahar, they'll eat it by the Pesach Sheni. The guy who's on a distant road, when he gets to Yerushalayim, will eat it on the Pesach Sheni. So there's only a delay in the eating of the korban Pesach. But there's still a chiyuv. Ma she'enken the orel, the one who is unfortunately uncircumcised because his brothers passed away, and the heretic, right, who will never be mechuyev to bring a korban Pesach, because the pasuk says, "Kol orel lo yochabai." Anyone who's uncircumcised will not eat from it. There's never a chiyuv of korban Pesach. So now we have a huge difference. The ones who are tamei and the derech rechaika, who are contaminated on a distant road, in truth are mechayev in a korban Pesach. So technically, there's a technical reason that I can't eat it now. So therefore, what am I instead going to do? I'm going to allow you to eat the matzah and the maror. But the orel, the uncircumcised, and the heretic, which are never mechuyev in korban Pesach, right? Lo yochabai, cannot eat, right? They never have a chiyuv of korban Pesach. If they don't have a chiyuv of korban Pesach to start with, maybe there is no matzah and maror either. Therefore, I needed two different psukim because the logic behind each, the two different parts are completely different. Tomei and derech rechaika are really mechuyev in korban Pesach. Technical reason why they can't eat it. Masheik and the orel and the ben nechar are not mechuyev. The only issue, and Tosfos talks about this a lot, kol ben nechar. The only problem I have with all of this is simply this. My problem is this: what happens if the orel between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni decides, you know what, I can't live like this. I know my brothers passed away. Nonetheless, I'm getting a bris milah. So he gives himself a bris milah, and he lives. Does he have to bring a Pesach Sheni or not? What do you guys think? According to what we just said, he does not have to bring a Pesach Sheni. Because you only bring a Pesach Sheni, what? When you're mechuyev on a Pesach Rishon, you just technically couldn't bring it. Since we're saying he was not, right? We're saying he was not mechuyev, even though subsequently he now circumcised himself before Pesach Sheni. Doesn't matter, he wouldn't be with Pesach Sheni because he wasn't mechuyev. That would be the logic here, right? That makes sense. You know what my problem is? Then what do you do about a katan? The halacha is, if someone is a katan on Pesach and he becomes a gadol between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, he brings the Pesach Sheni. Unless you say it's all midrabanan, but that's very strange. And that, I think, is a shtickle, a brisket Torah. If I remember correctly, Rav Chaim touched on what's going on with the thing. And so, to me, I think over here there's a grace of pilpul waiting to happen. What do you do with the oral that goes ahead and circumcises himself? From this Gemara, it's mashma straight up. We needed an extra pasuk to teach us that an oral and a ben necha are mechuyev in matzah and mora because they're completely not mechuyev in Korban Pesach. Mash'eke, the Tomei and the Derech Chayka are mechuyev in Korban Pesach. They just can't. So they what do you call it? It's more logical that they should eat Pesach when the pasuk comes to us, they're mechuyev in matzah and mora. But I might think the oral and a ben nechar would not be mechuyev in matzah and mora because they're not mechuyev in Pesach. But what happens if the oral does circumcise himself between Rishon and Sheni? What happens if the mumar makes tshuva between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni? Is he mechuyev? Is he not mechuyev in Korban Pesach? According to this, he's not mechuyev because he wasn't mechuyev in Pesach Rishon. You could only have a Pesach Sheni if I was mechuyev in Pesach Rishon. Except that is not 100% true because we see by a cotton that's not true. By a cotton who's not mechuyev on Pesach, Rishon would be mechuyev when he becomes a gadol. Second, we have a rule. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu manish al shem seifai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not punish al shem seifai and what's going to be at the end. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only one who knows what was, is, and will be. But and as long as a person is alive, right? Ad yomoisai techakeloi, v'im yoshum miyad tekaploi. A person is always oimid. A person is always oimid to do tshuva. You know where you see this? By bris milah. The Rambam writes, if somebody turns 13 and is not circumcised, he has to circumcise himself. But he says, Einoi chayiv koris ad shiyomus v'hu oral b'mezid. But he's not chayiv koris until he dies, and now he's an oral b'mezid. Since he's always, every day, he could circumcise himself, you can't be mechayiv koris if you could be misakein, because Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu manish al shem seifai. Well, then in that case too, this ben necha, if he decides to do tshuva, Yisrael, he's a Jew, right? He's a Jew, he's a full-fledged Jew, he doesn't have to be Megayer, he becomes a Jew. He's a Jew, he's always a Jew. So, according to this Gemara, it's mashma, what? That you're not Mechayiv. He's not Mechayiv because he wasn't Mechayiv by Pesach Rishon. But who says he wasn't Mechayiv by Pesach Rishon? The truth is, what's the difference? Since you can't aim man so same sci-fi, the moment he does tshuva, it's retroactive. He was a Jew. It was just a technical problem. So I think there's a lot going on over here. I'm not sure what the answer to all these questions are, but inquiring minds want to know. Okay, weiter.
It depends. If you say that Pesach Sheni is a tashlumin for the Pesach Rishon, then if you have no chiyuv of Pesach Rishon, then you can't. Then you have no chiyuv of Pesach Sheni either. Because
what do you do about a cotton? Yeah, but what do you do about a cotton? A cotton, a child that becomes that's a cotton on Pesach, but is a gadol by Pesach Sheni is mechuyev to bring the Korban Pesach. That's the problem. Here I have a case of where somebody is not mechuyev to bring the Korban Pesach, and when he becomes mechuyev to bring the Korban Pesach, he's what do you call it, on Pesach Sheni, he has to bring the Pesach Sheni. Why?
Yeah.
You're exactly right, Daddy. So it's a good question. Inquiring minds want to know. So we got a pulpul over there. All right, we got something to work on for the next year. Very good. Okay. Tanya Kabbalah the Rav. You're right, exactly. That's what's bothering me. You put your finger right on it. Exactly. Tanya Kabbalah the Rav. Says Rabbi, Sheish is Yomim Toichel Matzos, V'yoyim Hashvi Atzeres L'Hashem Elikecha. The pasuk says 6 days you should eat matzahs, and on the 7th day it should be an assembly for Hashem your God. Mash Shavi Rishos, just like eating matzah on the 7th day of Yom Tov or Pesach. Af Sheish is Yomim Rishos. So to eating matzah on all 6 days is discretionary. You don't have to eat matzahs. No different than Sukkot. After the first night of Sukkot, you don't have to eat in the Sukkah if you want to starve. My Tama, what's the reason? The 7th day is something included in the general category of the whole Yom Tov. And then it was singled out. And then it was singled out, like we say every morning. It wasn't singled out only to talk about itself. It rather came out to teach something about the whole general category, the whole Pesach. Yochel, therefore, I might have said, Yochel Af Laila Rishon Rishus. I might have thought, therefore, the first night of Pesach, it's also Rishus. If you want to eat matzah, you could eat matzah. If you don't want to eat matzah, you don't want to eat matzah. Right? Talmud loima al matzos u'meroyim yochlu. Sli eish al matzos u'meroyim yochlu. But that's not good. Ainly el b'zman shebeis hamikdash kayim. That's only good when the Beis Hamikdash was kayim. When the korban Pesach was they eaten with sli eish on the korban Pesach, matzos al meroyim yochlu. Matzos al mor you eat. How do I know today? B'zman she'ein Beis Hamikdash kayim minayin. How do I know that even today I still have a mitzvah to eat matzah? The pasuk is coming to establish a chayv even today. Come to the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon says there's no chiyuv to eat matzah the rest of Pesach, but every time you do eat matzah, you get a kiyum a mitzvah of achilas matzah of sheishes yomim toichel matzahs yom hashvi atzeres Hashem Elikecha. You don't have a chiyuv, but you have a mitzvah. So every time you eat matzah all Pesach long, you get a mitzvah every time you eat it. Same thing with Sukkot. You don't have a mitzvah of leisheg basukkah except the first night of Sukkot. But every time you go to eat in the sukkah the rest of Sukkot, you do get a mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Baita. Yashnu mitzvah nechelu. If while eating the korban Pesach, some members of the group fall asleep, they are allowed to continue to eat from it when they awaken. However, kulon lo yachlu. But if they all fall asleep, no, because then if they were eating and they fell asleep and then they woke up, it's like they were in 2 different places. Their mind was in 2 different places. You are where your mind is, so make sure your mind is where you want it to be. If everybody falls asleep according to the Tanakhama, fafucht. That's it. You can't eat anymore. We're now on Amud Beis, Kuf Chaf Amud Beis. Rabbi Yosi says, Nisnamu yochelu. If they doze, they're allowed to continue to eat the Pesach when they awaken. Nidmu lo yochelu. If they fall into a deep sleep, they may not. Okay, so the question is Rabbi Yosi talking about the first part of the Mishnah? Okay, is he talking about the first part of the Mishnah? Okay, but in other words, Rabbi Yosi limits it and says it's only dozing, but if some of them fall into a real sleep, that's it, everybody can't eat. And that means Rabbi Yosi is more chumrah than the Tanakhama. Or no, is Rabbi Yosi talking about the second half of the Mishnah? Okay, by kulon lo yochlu, and he's saying just the opposite. He's saying, no, that they're only forbidden if they fall into a regular sleep. But if the entire group merely dozed, took a small nap, then they can all continue eating. And the Gemara essentially is going to point this out, which way is Rabbi Yosi going. Okay, says the Pesach acher chatzos, the Pesach eaten after chatzos, metame es hayadayim, is metame the hands. Midrabanon, in order to try to get you not to eat the Pesach after Chatzos Halayla, they made your head double. And just like Hapigul, this is when somebody does the avodah on somebody's korban and has an intent to eat it after its time frame. The hanoisa, meat that was actually left over after the time frame of eating. The same thing. And the Gemara is going to explain. Rabbi Yosi says, Nisnamnu yochelu nidmu lo yochelu. Rabbi Yosi says, if you merely dozed, you can continue to eat. If you wake up, you fall to deep sleep, you can't. What does it mean, dozing? Asleep but not asleep, awake but not completely awake. Like, for example, when you're in a shir, when you're ready to daf yomi and you sort of doze off in the middle. You're there, but you're not there. In a case where you call him, he responds. But he can't think. His brain is a little fogged. But when you remind him of something, he remembers. Mara has a story. Abaye Yosef Kamei the Rabbah. Abaye was sitting before Rabbah, and I'm already going to say this thing. Abaye already had his Suda, and then he came over to Rabbah. Because of the Konamne, he saw that Rabbah was dozing. Amalei, he saw that Rabbah was dozing. Amalei, and Meina Kanoim Ma, the master is sleeping. Amalei, Manume Kaminamne, Mamolu dozing, the Tanan, the Snamnu Yoichu, Nidmu Lo Yoichu. Dozing you could, but falling into a deep sleep you cannot. So, Zokti Gemara Vaita. HaPesach acher chatzois metames hayadayim. Alma mechatzois havelei noisa. You see that this Mishnah holds that chatzois laila is it, and afterwards it becomes noisar. It becomes illegal to eat from it. It's left over after it's zaman. Man Tana, who's the Tana? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azayahu. It's Elazar ben Azayah. The Tanya, famous Gemara. And you shall eat the meat of the Pesach this night. Balayla hazeh. Rabbi Elazar ben Azayah, nemakan balayla hazeh. V'nema lahalam regarding makas b'chayris, the makkah of the firstborns. And I will pass through the land of Mitzrayim on this night. Just like over there. Makas B'chayis referred to midnight. You eat the eating of the matzah of the korban Pesach, and therefore the matzah, and therefore Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is only until Chatzos. Amalei Rabbi Akiva. And you shall eat the Pesach in haste, quickly, at Shas Chipazayin. That means until the hour of haste, which was daybreak, when they ran out of Mitzrayim. Why does it say by night? You would have thought that the Pesach should be able to be eaten like other korbanos during the day in which it was sacrificed. So when the korban Pesach is sacrificed on Erev Pesach, I should be able to eat the korban Pesach on Erev Pesach and the night of Pesach. Very good. 120b3. The Rabbi Akiva, Hai Hazeh Ma'ovid. Very good. So what does Rabbi Akiva, who says B'shas Chipazim until the morning, what does he do with the Hazeh? With the Zeh? It's coming to exclude another night. The Pesach is a Kachim Kalim. Shalomim Kachim Kalim. And Shalomim is a Kachim Kalim. And in fact, a Pesach that's brought not in its time, is brought early, automatically becomes a Shalomim. Remember, we learned that earlier in the Masechta, right? Just like a shlom that's eaten for 2 days, the day that it's slaughtered, the night, and the next day, so to Pesach will switch nights for the days, it'll be eaten for 2 nights. the night of Pesach, the day of Pesach, and the next night of the 16th. Kosev Rachmana Hazeh. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Amalach, I don't need that. Mi loisa suru ad boike nafkalon. You should not leave it until morning. Means that you don't have anything but the first night. I don't have any hava minute that you might think, that you might come to think I'm allowed to eat it for a second night. Rabbi Akiva Amalach, no. If the Torah had not said the word hazeh, I might have thought that pasuk of Losasuri Mimenu ad boiker havamina my boiker sheni, just like by the Shlomim. That's all. Rabbi Elazar Amalach kol echad because of boiker rishonu. And obviously Rabbi Akiva disagrees with that. He says if you don't have something else to limit it, the word boiker doesn't just mean, it means a morning, not the morning. Amar Rava, achal matzah bizman hazeh acher chatzos. If one ate matzah today after chatzos, the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lo yotzi yidei chavosai. Pshita, obviously, chiven the akakish lePesach kePesach tummy. Since matzah is compared to Pesach, where it says al matzos umeroimirim yoichlu, right? Sliesh matzah yoichlu, just like the carbon Pesach can't be eaten until chatzos. Of course, that means that the matzah can't be eaten until chatzos, which also means sipit tzich mitzrayim can't go further than chatzos. Why? What are you telling me? Mao, the same I might have thought. Had the apke kromekesha. The other pasuk already preempted the comparison of matzah Pesach. The pasuk that said Shisha Yomin Teichel Matzah Sinai Mashviat Tzeretz Tzeretz Hashem. Right? The pasuk that says 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the 7th should be an assemblage to Hashem, your God, which told me that all 7 days I eat matzah. So you see, matzah was separated from Korban Pesach because the Korban Pesach, everybody agrees, is only eaten when, everybody? Only the night of Pesach. But I have a second pasuk that tells me Sheshes Yom Matzahs. You eat matzahs all week long. So matzahs has been separated out. So the Torah already established an obligation to eat matzah even when there is no Korban Pesach. Right? So therefore the obligation is not bound by the chatzos. How I love Korban Pesach. Kamash Malon, so Rava comes to teach us the Chiyahadre Kral Milsa Kamaisa Dare. The pasuk comes to reinstate that the matzah obligation, even when there is no Pesach, is still reinstated to its original status with the Korban Pesach. Why? Because Rava is saying the truth is the matzah that we eat today is exactly the same time that we ate the matzah at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. When did I eat the matzah with the Korban Pesach? At the time of the Beis Hamikdash, I ate it with the Korban Pesach. I ate the Korban Pesach, Sli Eish, Al Matzah Sumaroin Yochlu, and at that time I also ate another Kazayas matzah of the Erev Teichlu matzahs, and the Mela I was Mekayim, which means that according to this, it's possible to argue that the matzah that we eat today, is still a chelik of the Korban Pesach. Because the truth is, as I've mentioned before, the Chassam Sofer says, the truth is we're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach today, it's just that the Arabs don't allow us. The Chassam Sofer says straight out to a letter, on an answer to Rabbi Kiva Eger, that the truth is you can bring the Korban Pesach. You can bring the Korban Pesach today. The only reason why we don't bring the Korban Pesach is because the Arabs don't allow us. And as the Kesef Mishnah brought, Reb Chaim Mipari went up to Eretz Yisrael to bring the Korban Pesach because of Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, when everybody's Tumah, nobody's Tumah, and the Arabs killed him. Outside of that, you could bring the Korban Pesach. So the truth is, it's very possible that the matzah that we're eating today is not only a chiyuv d'oraisa of the Erev Teichel matzahs, it's a chiyuv of the d'oraisa d'kedin of Korban Pesach. Because the truth is, there is still a chiyuv of a Korban Pesach, which then brings into question, how does Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov says it's all with the Rabbanon today? Because the truth is, Korban Pesach is even mechuyev today. Because you don't need the binyan. Because the mokim, it's totally b'mokim, and the mokim is always kodesh. Because kedusha is shayna, kedusha is shata, kedusha lotzit lavoy. The kedusha never leaves. And on Pesach, we say tumah hutra b'tzibor. So it's a big problem. This whole Gemara, it's a dance of people on what's really going on in this Gemara. Go right a little bit. We got a few more minutes. We want to go. Hapigol va'anoisim etames yadayim. Because we're suspect the kahuna that if they don't like the guy who's bringing the carbon, they'll deliberately make it piggle. They'll deliberately have an intent to have it after this man and screw this guy up and make him bring another carbon. So in order to forestall that, they knew the Kahanim were crazy about Tomei. The Rabbanan made, and they said, if you become piggle, your hands become Tamei. They knew the Kahanim wouldn't want this. Because of the laziness of the Kahanim and the Bailim, that they wouldn't, of Noiser, that they wouldn't eat the meat in time. One says that the minimum shear of pig or Noiser is a Kezayis. The Chadama Kibeya like an egg. Kufchaf Aleph Amen Aleph. Kufchaf Aleph Amen Aleph. Chad Tani a piggle. One taught with regard to piggle, the chad tani a noisa. Man, the tani a piggle, mishum the chad shekahuna. The one who taught on piggle is because I'm worried about, I suspect the Kahanim are going to try to screw this guy and have a deliberate intent to eat it after the time allowed to allow it to eat it, messing this guy up and having make him spend thousands of dollars on a new animal. So we told the Kahanim, your hands will be tomei if you become piggle, and this they were more afraid of. Man, the one who said anoisa is because he was worried the lazy of them that they wouldn't eat up the carbon in time. Man, the amakizayis, the one that says it's a kizayis, bisura. He's going on the shear of eating. What is the shear of achila minata midia? I say it's always a kizayis. On Shabbos, what are you eating? By the way, that means this upcoming Shabbos, you have to eat a kizayis of the chal. Okay, you have to remember that in the morning. Don't just take a bite of the chal. You have to eat a kizayis. You have to make a pirchas hamazon. Okay. Now, the one who holds like an egg, kitu masai. He goes by the biblical shear of Torah, which you always said is a larger shear. It's not the size of a kizayis of an olive. For something to become Torah is the size of an egg. That's it. Good. The last Mishnah. Let's keep going. If one made the bracha on the Pesach, he said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu le'echol haPesach poters es shel zebach. He just patted himself for making the bracha on the chagiga, on the shalmei chagiga, on the shalmei chagiga. I believe it's the shalmei chagiga. Hang on a second, I want to double check that. Remember, there were two chagigas. There was the chagiga that you brought together with the Korban Pesach. That was to make sure that you filled yourself up. And there was a second chagiga that was called the Shamei chagiga. To be honest, I'm not sure which chagiga we're talking about over here. Okay, I'm not sure. The article does not, as far as I can see, the article does not say which chagiga we're talking about. So we're probably, let's assume we're talking about the chagiga that comes along with the Korban Pesach, that in case the Korban Pesach is a small Pesach and it won't fill you up, we bring along another chagiga to fill your stomach up. Okay, so this is the filling up. The
Rashbam says it's the chagiga of the 14th day.
Oh, it is. Okay, thank you, Daddy. Okay, so it's the chagiga Yudalit. It's the chagiga that comes along with the Korban Pesach to make sure you have enough meat to fill you up. So poter es shel zebach. Beirach is shel zebach, but if you make a bracha on that chagiga, loy poter es shel pesach. You do not pati yourself to make a bracha on Pesach, Rabbi Yishmael. And that now makes sense, because you have to bring the Korban Pesach. You don't really have to bring the chagiga. You don't need to. Rabbi Akiva, however, loy zu poter zu, like because I don't have to bring the Chagiga Yudalit, how could the chiyuv that the bracha I make on my chiyuv go on something that I'm not obligated to? And obviously the bracha that I make on something that I'm not obligated on certainly is not going to help me with my Chagiga. Says the Gemara. When you think about it, the throwing of the blood is included in the pouring of the blood. Zerika, as you know, Zerika is spritzing. Shficha is pouring the blood on the Mizbeach. Pesach, the Korban Pesach, they didn't throw the blood, they poured the blood. Saints, according to Rabbi Yishmael. According to Rabbi Yishmael, the bracha that goes on Korban Pesach works for the Chagiga Yudalid. That tells me that whatever I do for the Pesach is okay by the Chagiga. So if by the Chagiga I forget to sprinkle, to throw the blood, and instead I pour the blood, it's okay. But the opposite way, the loy shaficha b'chlal zerika. But pouring the blood is not in the sacrifices of throwing the blood, so that one is not included in the throwing the blood. So in other words, if one sprinkles the blood for the Korban Pesach, he's not yotzi. He's got to throw. He has to pour the blood. Pouring the blood works for the Chagiga, but what's done for the Chagiga does not work for the Korban Pesach. Since the Chagiga uses zerika and not sheficha, it doesn't work. Mashenke Pesach is sheficha, and since I can be mekayim with the bracha of Korban Pesach, it helps me for the Chagiga. If by accident I do the sheficha for the Chagiga, it works too. L'divrei Rabbi Akiva, but according to Rabbi Akiva, and this is where we're going to stop, 121a2, according to Rabbi Akiva, loy sheficha b'chlal zerika, v'loy zerika b'chlal sheficha. Pouring is not included in throwing, and throwing is not included in pouring. Throwing and pouring. In other words, each one is not fulfilled by the other. Each one is mutually exclusive. We are now stopping on 121b, the last 4 lines of our Masechta.